WNST afternoon in the rain here in Baltimore. Luke Jones, I think we can say if the Ravens were actually horses instead of birds or football players, they would be mudders at this point and certainly finding all sorts of ways to win a football game. But as I have pointed out a couple of times and will all week, this is a script, man. I mean, extend these drives, shorten the game. It's 10 minutes to 4 and you're taking a knee. And it has looked incredibly easy over 5 weeks for Lamar Jackson in some sort of strange way, and I know you've already embraced the weirdness of all of this.
Yeah, it's definitely weird. I mean, I don't know if I'd say it's easy from the standpoint of the Ravens have played 5 games where it's been a one-score game in the fourth quarter, so, I mean, you're operating under a small margin for error, but from the standpoint of the other team knowing exactly what you want to do in the second half, and still being able to do it. Once again on Sunday, and we can talk about that first quarter because I think the way the Ravens survived that first quarter set them up for the rest of the formula to be able to play out the way it did. But time of possession in the second half, Ravens had the ball just over 21 minutes. Tampa Bay had the ball under 9. I mean, you do that, and it makes it incredibly difficult for the opposition to score points. And clearly the defense has a part in that because they're not allowing the opposing offense to sustain drives. And certainly it goes both ways. But the Ravens, after a really ugly first quarter where, let's face it, Tampa Bay missed some opportunities, and the Ravens were terrible in their first 2 drives. Lamar Jackson puts the ball on the ground for that third drive, which, of course, Tampa Bay went down the field and scored early in the second quarter. But that first quarter could have played out differently. And if it does, and we've talked about this over and over and over, what happens if the Ravens fall behind 14-3 or something along those lines?
Well, it's been 6 weeks since that's happened, which makes it
right,
even...
Right, and sure, I mean, but that's the uncertainty. But if you can avoid that, and you can avoid that for another week, then we're talking about this formula for another week and for the rest of the season now, and to see what happens over these next couple weeks, and if the Ravens get in the playoffs, what happens in January. But they continue to get the job done, and you really have to give the Ravens credit in that way. I mean, Tampa Bay is not a great team, but at the same time, this game could have been one of those games, especially if the elements had been a little bit different. You look at some of the drops that the Bucs had early in that game, that could have been a game where they fell behind 10-0 or something along those lines. But the defense certainly rose to the occasion with a couple hiccups, and that's it. You give up 12 points, you'll take that any day against one of the better offenses in the league, statistically speaking. And the offense, they did their thing, and Lamar Jackson shook off a really rough first quarter and played pretty well after that. And they really got the running game going after intermission, which that's kind of been the MO of this team. So nothing fancy about it. As I predicted at WNSP.net over the weekend when I did my 5 predictions for Sunday, didn't get the score right, but didn't really think it would be a performance that would necessarily change the eyeball test for the Ravens. I'm not sure anyone feels better about their long-term prospects based on what we saw, but it's a win. So kind of by default, you do feel better about it because they're 8-6 as opposed to 7-7. So not overly, it doesn't blow you away with being impressive, but they got the job done. It was workmanlike, for lack of a better term.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. As this formula works, as so goes the defense in the end. And to your point, I mean, the defense is never playing with any margin for error, right? They're always one breakdown, one big play away. And I know in the aftermath of all of this, pretty good defensive day all the way around in the rain, but 2 big plays that were otherwise backbreakers, that really kept the Buccaneers in a game that they didn't make a lot of good plays in.
Right. And like I said, I think you look at the first couple drives for Tampa Bay. I mean, they clearly had their issues big time in the rain. As much as we'll talk about how Lamar Jackson struggled to throw the ball and he had to fumble, but you look at those first 2 drives, Godwin had a big drop on that opening drive where the Bucs did move the ball and looked like they had a chance to maybe come away with some points, but he had a big drop. And then Evans had a big drop on that second drive that kind of torpedoed them. So beyond that, I mean, clearly everyone will point to the 3rd and 20, the 64-yard catch and the face mask on top of that. Terrell Suggs overran Jameis Winston, had a chance to bring him down. And, I mean, that's something that is concerning because we saw the Chiefs put up some big plays on the Ravens in some long distance, down and distance situations. And we've seen that on a few occasions from time to time over the last couple of years, if we want to talk about it in that context. But you can't be too upset with how they handled themselves overall. I mean, Cyrus Jones with the terrible muff in the third quarter, and you're thinking, wow, this game might have just flipped a little bit. You're thinking, what exactly is going to happen here after the Ravens had the touchdown drive to start the third quarter? Their defense, gets them off the field, and then you muff it, and Tampa Bay's in business deep in your territory, and the defense held them to 3 points. I mean, I think that was absolutely huge in the same way that I thought kind of surviving that first quarter with some of the things that happened was important. I think you point to that, and Tampa Bay takes over at the 14-yard line, and they get 5 yards and have to settle for a field goal. That only makes it a 5-point game at that point. That's pretty big. There's no doubt about that, and I think it kind of begins with what Marlon Humphrey was able to do for them. Others made plays. There were others that played well. Don't get me wrong, but as I opined during the game, I think Sunday was one of those performances for him. Shows you why, in my opinion, talking 2018 and moving forward, he's the best player on this defense, and I think the evidence bears out.
Well, he might be the best player that's not a kicker that we've had around here in a little while, right?
Might be. I mean,
maybe Yonda, Yonda against the grade is also in the Hall of Very Good, Suggs, whatever. But where they are in their career, how they're playing on any given day, the Brandon Williams play notwithstanding, and where C.J. Mosley is, and where Jimmy Smith's been, and two of those three guys have had a lot of injury issues, as well as Ronnie Stanley, who was a lottery pick kind of guy as well. Marlon Humphrey has emerged as on that pathway to whatever that Ed Reed, McAllister sort of very, very good player over the next 5 years. That's going to be an $18 or $20 million football player, right?
Well, you hope so. I mean, let's face it. I think everyone's so focused on what's happening right now, and rightfully so. But it struck me in the post-game locker room as John Harbaugh was talking to reporters that Lamar Jackson was in there waiting to talk to the media, rightfully, naturally speaking, because he's the starting quarterback now. And Marlon Humphrey came in to talk after him. And I just looked at those two kind of interacting with each other. And there was nothing special about the interaction, but I just thought to myself, if the Ravens are going to get back to a level where they're competing for a championship on an annual basis, I couldn't help but think Lamar Jackson on the offense and being the starting quarterback, no matter how long he ends up being that guy, he's going to be the guy at least for the foreseeable future. I think that's pretty obvious. And Marlon Humphrey being the young, great defensive player that he looks like he's already trending toward being, and understanding that so many of the impactful players on this defense are either on the wrong side of 30 or, in the case of C.J. Mosley, hitting free agency this offseason and not necessarily sure he's going to be on this team next year. So you look at those two, talking Jackson and Humphrey, if the Ravens are going to be back at a point at some point here in the next couple of years of competing for getting back to the Super Bowl and being in that top tier in the AFC again, I think those two are going to be leading the way. And that's not to say that there aren't others that are going to be really important, but
or who they draft, or what happens with Andrews or Hurst or any of these young, or Zeus, who might wind up being the best right tackle in the NFL 3 years. I don't know, right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't have said that about Jensen or Assembly or any of those guys that got big money deals. But I'm with you. If in 2020 and 21 at this point there aren't 8 jerseys and 29 jerseys in the stadium, they're probably not going to be a very good football team over the next 2 years. If that's not the case, right?
Yeah, and it's hard to say because, believe me, they need much more. I mean, this team has to find an elite edge rusher to kind of take the torch from Terrell Suggs. And at this point, Matt Judon's been a nice player. I like Matt Judon. I think he's really had a strong second half of the season, but he's not looking like that guy that could be a 6 or 7-time Pro Bowl player like Terrell Suggs has been, and Defensive Player of the Year at one point in his career. And Tyus Bowser and Tim Williams have not been that heir apparent 2 years into this thing. They've both been disappointments. So they need other things. They need an edge rusher. They certainly need an impact wide receiver. I mean, we've talked about that for as long as you and I have known each other, talking about the Ravens And you hope that they find that guy for Lamar Jackson, because, frankly, I'm not sure they're going to be able to buy that guy. They might need to draft that guy, considering what this offense is right now from a passing standpoint. I'm not sure free agent wide receivers are going to be lining up, eager to sign up with the Ravens, throwing the ball 140, 150 yards per game, at least at the end of this season anyway. So it's not as though they don't have a ton of work to do. But again, quarterback and corner being such an important position, as it's been for a long time, but especially in this day and age, in the pass-happy NFL modern era, I couldn't help but look at those two and say, if those guys can truly be the best player on their respective sides of the ball, then, and they can improve and continue to grow, then this team might be in pretty good shape here over the next couple of years.
Well, I watched the Texans the other night, right? No disrespect, but and I don't really know where Watt is in his career, and they've also drafted along the D-line with number 1 picks and all that. But, I mean, they obviously have a special wide receiver, right? You know what I mean? And they have a kid at quarterback who looks to be special, and they're doing other things, and they'll draft some other weapons on the offense, and they'll draft some corners and the things they're going to need there. But I see a couple of guys there and say, whoa, we don't have anybody that good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As any of those guys. Our kicker's good, right? Literally, we have guys that, Suggs and Yonder, we're going to be talking about the Hall of Fame, but when I see these other teams, and with the Patriots, I don't know what the hell to say about them 2 decades into this, about how many of their players are going to be Hall of Famers or not, or difference makers. But it feels to me the more difference makers you have that aren't named Tom or Brady or Gronkowski, which is just a couple of guys they've had, that it really, when you think about the great Ravens teams or even the good Ravens teams, boy, there's always been a Lewis and a Reed and something special going on in there, and Ogden, and to talk about Humphrey after this game at this point, he's the next hope here. Because, look, as long as Lamar Jackson's leading with his head, and I really like the kid, and it's exciting, and it's fun, I'm getting on a plane, I'm going to California this week, and it's awesome, and we're going to be in the playoffs, I believe, in a couple of weeks. I don't know that he's the quarterback in 2023 the way people are looking at Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City and, building half a bust for him out on the freeway right now,
Sure, and that's understandable. And to be clear, when I made that comment, I'm not saying that Lamar Jackson or Marlon Humphrey are cornerstone players just yet. My thought is more envisioning that being what you're hoping the Ravens are a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. But they both have a long way to go. I mean, in the case of Humphrey, who is further along, he's in his second year, he's got to show he can stay on the field. Injuries have been nagging for him, and he didn't practice most of this week leading into Sunday's game. So there's a long way to go for that. And I think the fact that you brought that up, and we've talked about that so much, for me, it really does speak to how, and this is where John Harbaugh deserves credit. As much as there are things about John Harbaugh that I don't necessarily care for, I am not enamored whatsoever with members of his offensive coaching staff. But I do look at the Ravens from the context of what you just said. They don't really have those superstars at any position other than kicker, really.
Oh, and by the way, they were 4-5, and their Super Bowl MVP quarterback was hurt at the bye after getting their ass kicked by their division rival and going into a hole. And they're 8-6, and we're going to wherever the hell, San Diego. I'm going to keep calling it 6 because I'm going to San Diego. I mean, I'm not going to Los Angeles. I believe me, I brought that up with Weddle and Tony Jefferson. I'm like, come on, who the hell would go there and stay in Carson? The hell, Carson? Go to Dana Point. But yeah.
But it does speak to the job that John Harbaugh and this coaching staff, even if there are certain individuals, Marty Morningweg, who you're not really sure about, and you like that. But
dude, I'll still say the way there should be that this thing would be the best way. The optimal way to do this would be Flacco running the offense with a whole lot of Lamar, right? So I think that was what they envisioned for 6 months. That's not where they are right now. Where they are right now is 8 yards in a cloud of dust. By the way, I'm coining that for 8 yards in a cloud of dust is what Lamar Jackson is, right?
But that said, and even acknowledging that Lamar Jackson hasn't done a whole lot with his arm, and even acknowledging that the Ravens, let's face it, 4 of these 5 games, these 4 wins in 5 games, haven't exactly been a murderer's row. I mean, Cincinnati, Oakland, Atlanta, Tampa Bay. We're not talking about teams that are in the playoff hunt at this point. However, because of what you just said, that they were 4-5 and that their former Super Bowl winning, Super Bowl MVP quarterback was hurt, How many teams have been in that kind of a situation over the years
where nighty-night.
They lose their quarterback? They're 4-5. They come out of the bye. They don't even have that brutal of a record. I mean,
and all of a sudden in Week 15, Nate Peterman is your quarterback. Like literally, right? Like that's what usually happens to 4 and 5 teams that start rookie quarterbacks. Like literally, man. So hats off to Harbaugh one way or another. Everybody wanted him fired a month ago. Who knows where the roulette is going to play this thing, and whether they're going to be playing football the first week of January or 3 weeks into January at this point, and whether Joe Flacco's not the starting quarterback by the time they wind up in New England in the second week, and the gadget offense comes out in some sort of weird way, and they run this ideal thing. Because it's all sitting there for them. I mean, they could certainly go out to San Diego, wherever they have to play the Chargers this week, and win. I mean, I'm not betting against them at this point.
Well, I'll bet against them to beat the Chargers. I'm not saying they can't, but if you're asking me who I think is going to win, I'm going to say the Chargers.
You watched them give the Chiefs everything last week, too, so.
Well, but I'm not saying they can't, but, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I think they're a favorite or that that I expect them to win. But just the point though, and yes, it's a first round quarterback, but even teams that have a first round quarterback, even scenarios like last year with Kansas City when Alex Smith was still the guy and Patrick Mahomes, and look, at that point we didn't know what Patrick Mahomes was going to become, but even teams that have been in that scenario where you lose your starting quarterback halfway through the year and you're still kind of sort of hanging in there. Look at Green Bay last year with Aaron Rodgers. They lose him, and they couldn't get out of their own way.
Deshaun Watson, over for their season, right? Like Oakland a couple of years ago, Derek Carr, over, right? Cincinnati, Andy Dalton, even though the backup won the game, over.
Sure.
So, you go, we did watch the Eagles last year, right? So, I mean, now we do know that that's possible at least, right?
It's possible. I mean, it's certainly not the blueprint. It's certainly not what I'm anticipating out of the Ravens this year, but it was a first-round quarterback. But even with it being a first-round quarterback stepping in, that still speaks to the coaching acumen of John Harbaugh to keep this thing together. Again, were there some variables that set up nicely for this? Absolutely. I mean, look at the run defenses that they've played since the bye week. But I think that was part of the idea of not just going to Lamar Jackson because it was kind of out of necessity initially, but that's kind of the mindset of sticking with this and seeing how it's going to work out. And look, I don't know how it's going to fare going to the Chargers on next Saturday night, which will be the best defense they've played to this point since the bye, since the start of the Lamar Jackson era. And they're going to be playing on a short week against a team that is rested, against an offense that is firing on a higher level than any of the teams they've played other than Kansas City. I know Tampa Bay statistically looks good, but of course very erratic with the way they turn the ball over. So it's going to be a huge test for both sides of the ball. And I think they can certainly go there and compete and keep it close, but we'll see if they can graduate. They came very close to graduating against Kansas City. A lot of people bought into the moral victory idea, and I'm not going to say it can't be viewed that way, but I'm also not going to disagree with fans who said, well, same old Ravens.
Hey, bro, I tell you what, if there's not enough gumption to say if we win this game, we stand a really good chance to be hosting a playoff game in January at home, you know what I mean? Like winning this game would be a difference maker given where Pittsburgh has to go this week. Hey, man, I'll ride that roller coaster to say if you win in California, you don't have to go back to California in a couple of weeks. And more than that, you get to stay at home and play week one, maybe against them or someone like them. So, there's a ton at stake here as to what happens after New Year's Day. And look, I watched the Browns play the other night. I'm not counting against them. I mean, they have enough weapons and do enough to come in here. And, I see the ghost of Rashad Perryman and the number 19 creeping over, the shadow of the stadium on New Year's. But I'll say this. This is an incredible opportunity when you consider they can win the division, Luke, right? And they get a chance to go do this right now. That I don't know what the Vegas numbers would have been on this, but it would have been substantial, 30, 40, 50 to 1, to have the notion that the Ravens would have done this. And you go back, you have all the nerdity with the percentages. What were they, 12% to make the playoffs or whatever at 4 and 5 or 8%? Just some crazy low number. And now it's probably in the 80s or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was ever that low, and I don't think it's quite that high at this point. But they're certainly in good position. They're in the position where they can control their fate. As much as I, kind of don't like that general phrase, I guess. But they can control their own business here to get in. I mean, whether you're talking about division or wild card, just keep winning. And it's a good thing they won on Sunday because Indianapolis and Tennessee both won. So the pressure, is still there in every way at this point for them to keep winning. But, it's certainly, they took care of business on Sunday. And again, was it overly pretty? Was it, do you feel better about them from an eyeball test standpoint than, a heartbreaking close loss against the best team in the AFC? I don't think so, but just by the sheer will of winning, you've improved your likelihood of getting to the postseason. So they just, it was a workmanlike effort. Like I said, not spectacular, but I think it was really important for them to survive, to endure that first quarter when there was absolutely some adversity. And, it's like, quite frankly, they were pretty fortunate in that first quarter that things could have gone worse and they could have been in a position where they were down by 10 points or something like that midway through the first half. And then you're asking that question, is Marty Morningwig sticking with the run at that point? And I think a lot of evidence over the last 2 or 3 years would certainly make you wonder if that would be the case.
And off to California we go. We'll have extended coverage with Luke Jones from Owings Mills as we get ready to go over the river and through the woods, at least to my cousin's house in Carlsbad. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Before I do anything, I want to give a shout-out to all of our sponsors. I've got my Coppin hat on. Coppin's our partner. Juan's getting it done out there. D-Wayne, everybody. We got the games on AM 1570 at WNST throughout the MEAC, so a shout-out to Coppin. We got Pizza John's. Get on over there. Get the ravioli. Get the gift cards for the holidays. You give them a Pizza John's gift card, they go and cash that thing in like January, February, March. They're going to be happy. Essex, 50 years doing it. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. I saw Justin Tucker on the way in and out, and Luke and I had a little cup of Kona blend before the game began. If you're out on our social media, you saw that as well. Charles Newsonoff at Sun since 1923. True love comes in all shapes and sizes. Got a holiday week ahead. If you need a last-minute gift, Sydney is there for you at charlesnewsonoff.com. The lead test of your team, selling my condo, selling your house, selling whatever it is that you have that's real estate oriented. It's the biggest investment you're going to make. Trust the good folks at Lee Tessier and LeeTessier.com to get it done for you. Cole Roofing's a sponsor of our community and charity series. Billy Cole's going to be here to give me some more therapy on the backside of my Tony Robbins stuff that I've been running, which is cool there as well. King Discount Liquors, give the King a ring this week. Go see Johnny Bev, get the wine, get the hot toddy, get the eggnog. My mom would have had the Manischewitz or the Mogan David or the 2020 with Joe Elliott in the back alley on Bank Street. King Discount Liquors, get to Rosedale and give the King a ring. All right, we got tons of sponsors, tons of stuff. I'm going to California. We're going to get some Terps in here, certainly some Orioles, as we have a new manager. And we're trying to keep the Ravens on the up and up as they head to 8-6 and off to Carson, California for a special Saturday night edition of Monday Night Football that used to be Sunday Night Football. That's now Saturday night. Flexed in for my California pleasure. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.